friends, my name is Claire and today we're going over 10 things I wish people knew about autism, so please, stick around! Hi friends, my name is Claire and this is my channel, Woodshed Theory. Here, I make content about what it is like to live as an adult on the autism spectrum and whatever else feels good to me, so if that sounds good to you or if you're feeling particularly gracious today, and I hope that you are, please go ahead and click the subscribe button, ring the bell. I almost forgot to mention that sometimes I put out more than one video a week. Click the like and the share. That's my doodad. That's my little tune if you're new here. I'm coming to you today with a list of my own making. I decided to sit down and think, if I wanted somebody to know about autism, somebody who didn't know much about it or maybe only knew stereotypical tropes about autism, what would I want them to know? So I've gathered up 10 things that I would absolutely want somebody to know who doesn't have autism or maybe who does have autism. Sure, we'll go with anyone. Neurotypical, neurodiverse, what I want people to know about autism. The first thing I wish people knew about autism is that autistic people are everywhere. They're in every inch of this world, and you know autistic people. You might think, oh no, I've never met an autistic person, but that's simply not true. Autism is a neurological condition, and it's not something that you can see. And many people go later into life without being diagnosed because they become very good at masking their symptoms. So if you've ever met a person who seems a little different, or hey, they might not seem neurodiverse at all, they still might have autism and you wouldn't know. So whether you know it or not, autism is a part of your life. The second thing I wish people knew about autism is that there are not more autistic people now than there used to be in the past. What there is more research and resources into the study of autistic people that help us to be able to identify these traits even later on in life or earlier on in childhood. I've heard this late diagnosed group called the lost generation of people with autism, and that's basically true. I myself didn't get diagnosed until I was 31, and they weren't even diagnosing girls at that point until I was almost in grad school. The third thing I wish people knew about autism is that we don't need your support, your acceptance, your awareness to exist. We're going to exist no matter what. So I don't need you to approve of my autism or accept my autism or believe my autism. I don't need you to. I would just prefer that you would because it would make everyone's life easier. Sometimes I wonder if neurotypical people understand that their experience perhaps with autistic people might be a little bit more positive if they put in a little bit of work as well. Not that autistic people don't have to put in the work, and we do. We constantly make changes to make neurotypical people more comfortable and mask our autistic behaviors. But it would be helpful if neurotypical people, or more neurotypical people, understood what autism was and wanted to work with us and wanted to communicate with us better. However, it doesn't mean that I don't exist or that my autism is fake just because you don't believe in it. It is real, I've been diagnosed, there is research on the subject, so if you're not into believing the research and the science behind things, that's your problem, not mine. The fourth thing I wish that people knew about being on the autism spectrum is that autistic people want relationships. Okay, not every autistic person. I'm one autistic person. I don't speak for everyone. I'm sure there are people who are autistic out in the world who don't want relationships with people. But from my personal experience, I found that most people who are on the autism spectrum desire to have relationships with other people. And that could be friendships or romantic relationships. It could be working relationships. We want to understand people and we want to be understood. almost desperately. That's why you might think that the autistic people that you meet are trying too hard. Well, first of all, we can't read your facial expressions or your social cues, so we have to learn to read what's going on from basically our gut feeling of the situation, which isn't always correct, and what you're saying, and usually neurotypical people aren't very straightforward. I'm not saying you're not straightforward. I'm just saying most neurotypical people are not straightforward. They kind of speak around things to be more socially acceptable, and autistic people don't do that. But yes, we want relationships. There are people who are married on the spectrum. There are people who have boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever friends, best friends, acquaintances. We like having people in our lives. It's not easy for us to have relationships, so if we have tried to have a relationship with you, just know we've put in a lot of effort. The fifth thing that I wish people knew about autism is that having autism spectrum disorder doesn't necessarily mean that you have a learning disorder. There are people on the autism spectrum who obviously have learning disorders, but people who have what used to be considered Asperger's syndrome, they most likely won't have any learning delays or disorders. Is that how I want to put that? They might be delayed, but they will learn it eventually. In fact, many people who are on the autism spectrum outrank neurotypicals in their intelligence. And if you ever want to test that out, just go ahead and ask a neurodiverse person something about their special interest, and they will give you their PhD thesis. The sixth thing I wish people knew about being on the autism spectrum is that, for the most part, autistic people would like to be treated equally but differently. What do I mean by this? As I mentioned before, neurodiverse people spend a lot of their time accommodating their behavior to fit into a neurotypical world that doesn't necessarily make sense to us, but most of the time we'd like to fit in, and to do that we change who we are to fit in with neurotypical people. Now, I am not a proponent of this, what we call masking our autistic behaviors, because it can be really dangerous and lead to burnout, depression, etc. But it is something that we do. All I'm saying is it would be nice for people to learn about autism, ask us about our sensory needs, because we are more than willing to accommodate yours. So it would be great if you also accommodated our sensory needs. The seventh thing I wish that people knew about being on the autism spectrum is that autistic kids grow up into autistic adults. That's right, folks. You can't be cured of your autism. Now, this is something I've heard from people before in comments and emails. I was autistic when I was younger, but my mother, pastor, aunt has told me that I grew out of my autism, or that I did a certain therapy and now I'm no longer autistic. This is simply not true. If you're born autistic, you will be autistic for your entire life. It's just the way that your neurological map works. It's not the typical way, it's a neurodiverse way. And I get really riled up about this subject because I know that there is a stigma that if you're an autistic adult and you are okay in social situations to the extent that you're not embarrassing yourself or your family, or you're not showing outward symptoms of autism, that means that you don't have autism and that you don't have any needs as an autistic person. And that's not true. Even if you've gone to therapy for your entire childhood and you've learned to act neurotypical, you can still have meltdowns as an adult. You can still have shutdowns. You can still be rude to people on accident because your brain isn't wired the way that a neurotypical brain is. So no, you don't outgrow it. And I wish people I wish people would understand that. The number 8 thing that I wish people knew about being on the autism spectrum is that autistic people can do almost anything neurotypical people can do. This, as I mentioned, includes getting married, having a job, driving, traveling on their own. Not every autistic person has the same needs as every other autistic person. Now, we all have some needs. Usually we have a lot in common, but for example, I might not struggle so much in social situations, but I might really struggle with shut down in social situations or eloping from social situations when I'm just done. But that doesn't mean that I can't get married or drive a car or do all the things that neurotypical people do. In fact, neurodiverse people are experiencing so much more sensory input than neurotypical people. So we get to do things even bigger than neurotypical people do. We get to do them on an autism scale. The number 9 thing that I wish people knew about being on the autism spectrum is that an autism diagnosis is not a death sentence. I especially want to talk about this because people who are late diagnosed often reach out to me and ask me how I got used to the fact that I was autistic, and they're not doing well because they found out that they're autistic, and I completely understand that. It took me a long time to be comfortable with who I am and to be comfortable in my diagnosis, especially because I always wanted to, I knew I was different and I wanted to fit in. And I thought that I was doing everything I needed to fit in. Why wasn't it working? So to find out that you're different from other people or that you're on the autism spectrum, it can be a big blow, especially if you're late diagnosed, because then you have to unpack the years of trauma of growing up as an undiagnosed child in a neurotypical world that wasn't built for you. You know what I'm talking about. Constantly being told you're a drama queen, or not being popular because you're too honest or too strict with rules, not being good at group projects, being too literal and people not understanding that. So it can be a difficult transition to work through all of those feelings and emotions. However, learning you're autistic can be one of the most wonderful, beautiful, freeing, informative things that you have ever done. How else should I say it? Welcome home. Ooh, I get a little emotional. Not knowing that you're on the autism spectrum and constantly trying to do your best, it takes a toll on a person. And I'm not saying that I let myself off the hook when I found out I was autistic, but I let myself off the hook mostly. I stopped being so hard on myself. I found myself able to give myself grace. I felt so comfortable in the understanding of who I was for the first time, and I felt like I was given a new life. So I think it's the opposite of a death sentence. I mean, maybe a death sentence to your old life, but as far as your future, you can step forward with so much more confidence and so much more understanding about who you are. To me, that's a wonderful thing. And finally, the 10th thing that I wish people knew about being on the autism spectrum is that autistic people can feel joy, happiness, contentment. We can feel love. We can feel these emotions. Just because I'm autistic doesn't mean I sit around all day and mope that I'm autistic. Just because I'm autistic doesn't mean that I'm less. I deserve to have happiness, peace, joy, contentment. I deserve to enjoy and find fulfillment in my life just as much as any other neurotypical person deserves. I just want to make the point that autistic people are not somehow subhuman. Perhaps we're even superhuman. It's so important that we as autistic people allow ourselves to work towards these things, because especially in the late diagnosed community, a lot of us were really struggling with these things before our diagnosis. And now it seems that happiness might be possible, love might be possible, understanding of oneself, peace might be possible, self-confidence, feeling of contentment, feeling successful. All of those things can happen for us. They just happen differently than for somebody who is neurotypical, and that's fine. I want people to know that autistic thoughts and feelings and needs are just as valid as anyone with a neurotypical brain. Don't you think so? Well, everyone, that was my 10 things that I wish people knew about autism. Can you think of any more that you wish people knew about autism? Did you learn anything from this list? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Have a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye!